Good morning, William.
Good morning, Tony. How are you?
I'm pretty good, thank you. Yeah, we've been discussing the format of our episode today, episode three, and we're thinking that we'll start by discussing the differences between Eastern and Western education systems and our experience thereof.
Yeah, that sounds like a valuable topic for us to discuss and for people to listen to. Can we start off by maybe you saying what's your personal experience or exposure to?
Absolutely, yeah. So I was a bit late to the party. I mean, you were there before me, weren't you, in China, being slightly older than me as well. We won't pay too much attention to that.
A little bit, thank you.
So when I arrived in China in 2002, I was a naive Oxbridge graduate who had been privately educated and hung around an extra year in Cambridge and decided to do the Teach in China program with 100 other graduates from British universities. And I was planted after 3 weeks or so of training in how to teach English as a foreign language in Shanghai. I was planted in Guangdong province into a rural school, which had farmers and factory workers' children in it. It was a fairly big school, and I was the only foreigner there apart from a guy from Cameroon. So a white foreigner and a black foreigner in a school, 3,000 students. Um, and we lived opposite each other on the fourth floor of a concrete skyscraper, 8 stories high, we could call it, living block, in a sort of enclosed compound. And soon afterwards, I found a way to engage with other foreigners, but I was kind of the only foreigner apart from Takim within a 20-mile radius of this school, this compound. And I was in China. I mean, that was my starting point. I was then in China for a total of 4 years, and I gradually built up my Chinese language skills. So I learned to speak Mandarin and learnt to engage with the locals in their mother tongue. Found an expat community, which included you, and 4 years later, decided to come back from my long and varied experience in the south of Guangdong province experience and went back to the West again. But yeah, tell me more about your experience of the East in comparison to that.
Right. Mine mine covers my whole life, really, I suppose, because my father was in the army. I was born in Singapore and lived in a few different countries around the world. And whilst I was at school and university in the UK, my father was again sent to Hong Kong. So I went to Hong Kong. He came back to UK. Then I stayed in Hong Kong, did some tutoring there. I remember tutoring economics when I was actually at university at LSE. I did some economics tutoring in Hong Kong, when I was 2021. Then I stayed in Hong Kong, did a few other jobs, but then 2002, I actually went over the border to Country Garden School from Hong Kong into Guangzhou, into Guangdong province. Um, Knocked on doors asking if they need any teachers because I thought I fancied a change in career. And they said, yeah, can you start on Monday? So I said, no, I've actually got a job in Hong Kong, but maybe I could start in September instead. They allowed me that lenience, that leeway. And so I taught in that Guangdong Country Garden School for 6 years where we met, as you mentioned. Um, so that was till 2008. Then I was offered another job teaching economics again up in Shanghai. I was there for 4 years. Then from Shanghai, I went down to Ho Chi Minh City, or also known as Saigon in south of Vietnam. And I was there for 4 years. And then after that, I came back to UK, having applied to a bunch of different schools in UK, and wound up with an offer from Warwick School in the centre of the UK, which is where I have been teaching for the last 12 years, and have also done a little bit of tutoring, like had a few students, maybe two, three students every year. On top of that. So I've got a fairly extensive experience of both East and especially East and also Western education. The Western education, Warwick School, we also have a fair number of uh, international students, especially from Hong Kong and the mainland China. Mainland of China coming to Warwick, so it's like a continuation of the East-West in within Warwick itself too. So yeah, that's my
Absolutely.
experience
Yeah.
of it.
So I'm going to be mostly interviewing you with a little bit of back and forth. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate and disagree with some of the things that you say just to make things interesting on occasion. But since I was only there
Careful
for
you.
4 years and you have a wealth of more experience in Asia in general, for me it was just the south of China, and you speak Mandarin better than I do, and raised children even in Asia, at least for the first halves of their childhood.
Indeed.
You probably have a slightly more rounded personal experience of various Eastern cultures and family life through those years in China and Vietnam, as you said, as well as then what that looks like when you come back, having spent pretty much half of your life or more in Asia. So those are sort of our personal experiences in the East. So can you sort of maybe talk about some general differences between the educational systems in the East versus what we have specifically in the UK?
Right. I think the key differences really are uh, maybe in terms of the ideology or the philosophy behind the education, that in Asia it tends to be far more factually based, and the general process of education is the teacher gives facts which the students learn, and then the students are expected to repeat or regurgitate even those facts in an exam setting, which goes back to the whole sort of Confucian type view on development, I suppose, that the idea of respecting your old elders and that they will tell you how the system should work and you learn from it. And then the story is that China was the first one to have public exams, extensive public exams, and the so you would be tested on your ability to repeat these ideas about what the knowledge that you were told by your elders, you would be expected to repeat it and then carry on that information in the future. So I think that's the origins of how I see an Eastern education as developing, that it's factual, there's repetition of facts almost, and the ability to store them in your mind. Whereas a Western education, even though it is similar almost in terms of its historical foundations and in going back for centuries, if not millennia. For example, the Oxbridge University is going back like up to 1,000 years or so, and various schools like Warwick schools meant to go back over 1,000 years from Edward the Confessor. So we've got the history here, but it's evolved in a slightly different way, and maybe we have a formal system, obviously, of aiming for the university application. Or a major aim of both is to get people into a university, and certainly for primary and secondary education. But I think the big difference is the ideology in UK has moved towards rather than repeating what we are told, it's more taking what we are told and more learning how to think. I would I would say in terms of we use ideas that we're given and uh, use that to build our own ability to assess any situation and come out with a well-grounded, logical opinion or course of action based on facts we are given. So I think that's the underlying idea that Eastern education is the factual basis, in depth and in a rigorous way so as to be able to replicate it. Whereas a Western system is more about how to being taught how to think and then being given think on your feet and being given facts and being able to derive a course of action based on it. That's pretty much how I see it.
I mean, my experience when I first arrived in China as a 22-year-old was massive classes of maybe 50 plus students. Because I was in
Yeah.
a state school, not the international school that you first arrived in. I was dropped right in the deep end of being the only teacher at the front of classrooms of 50 plus students. I think the biggest class size I had was 71 students, and it was just me at the front. Um, and I was delivering oral English lessons, lesson after lesson, pretty much the same lesson plan delivered to, um, well, junior one, junior two, junior three, senior one, senior two, senior three. So a mixture of those age groups, just made slightly more difficult according to the age and level of oral English that you could expect from those students. In general, I found the oral English level to be pretty low in 2002. And I've also found the students to be fairly compliant and respectful of the teachers. I think this is one of the main differences between East and West in terms of the way that teachers are held in high regard by the students and how you can still manage a class of such a large size, even as a 22-year-old naive Westerner coming into a classroom. There's also a sense of celebrity almost that I felt as a Westerner going into China because we are different. It's almost like I was a minor celebrity going into the classroom in China. So do your experiences sort of mirror that, or are they slightly different given that you're in an international school?
They largely mirror it. That it's a very good point that, and I agree totally that teachers are held in high regard there, that teaching is a very respected profession in Asia, and that's consistent across certainly the Chinese speaking parts like Taiwan, Hong Kong, and China. And um, from my understanding, it was the same in Vietnam, and my understanding is that in Japan and Korea, it's similar. So in East Asia, I think that is very consistent that teachers are held in high regard. And yes, one as a teacher, one is pretty much sort of uh, one's very much appreciated, and I think not only by the students but also the parents that the parents appreciate what the effort that teachers are putting in and the knowledge that teachers have and what teachers are doing um, for their children, which is somewhat in contrast to what happens in UK, where the parents are fear again given the openness or the freedom to say express your opinions. Then I think in the West, then the parents are far more likely to um, be making suggestions to teachers as to what they should be doing, and also seeing. I think a major difference is that if there are any issues with a child's education in Asia, it's seen as the child who is at fault or who needs to change their approach, whereas in the West, Some parents are of the opinion that it's the teachers who should be changing their approach, and therefore education maybe is more of a joint venture between the parents and the teachers, with the parents giving advice as well. Whereas in the East, teachers are experts, and the parents will listen to them. So yes, I have had that, and certainly it was a pleasure teaching in Asia, where one is accorded that level of respect and sort of social position, social status, which is quite contrast to the UK. It's not that teachers are not respected in UK, but it's certainly different in the perspective from the parents.
Perhaps we're playing slightly with stereotypes here, but we could perhaps characterize Eastern education as more rote learning based and Western education as more critical thinking being more important. Um, Respect for teachers in Asia higher than respect for teachers in the West. Um, we could also think that there's more pressure from parents for their children to succeed in a very competitive ecosystem versus in the West, there's more freedom of approach and less pressure, although that might be changing. Would you agree with those characterizations?
Yes, the rote learning is certainly the students that I taught. I was not part of delivering rote learning because I've always taught from what I would seen as a Socratic approach, meaning an exchange of ideas. So I would give ideas, ask students to relate them to what they could see that's going on in the world, and try to find evidence either to support the theory that I was proposing or to challenge it. And I think in the East, students were not invariably used to that, or it took them a bit of learning to become comfortable with even challenging the teacher. If the teacher tells you this is what theory says, then they would all write it down typically and would not necessarily want to or see their position as being one where they could challenge it, that it was something to be accepted. So, yes, that was a breakthrough. We were doing IB I think we went from A level to IB initially in Guangdong, and the International Baccalaureate is very much questioning and challenging things. So it was a learning curve, which required some undoing what their rote learning and their idea that the teacher is always right, and
Absolutely, yeah.
more of that concept of challenging. So they had to learn that, and as part of that, as you said, I think the freedom to be able to express your opinion was also something that they had previously in your large classes of sort of 50 up to 70 students, as you expressed. And I never had classes of that
No,
size, but that was because I was in a Chinese private school, sort of. Semi-international, or in a Chinese school with
Chinese run international.
yeah,
Yeah,
Chinese slash international school. So they were moving in that direction, but I don't think the freedom that they were given, or that the specification that the whole curriculum of the International Baccalaureate gave them, I think it was a learning curve for them to get on board with that as much as it was with the content, because they took the content in pretty readily, but to be able to sort of take that in their own direction was not something that they had been trained in. And so that was as much the training as anything else that we were doing there.
absolutely. So yeah, my experience was the state school system for the first year, embedded in this village school of, as I say, 3,000 students, mostly They're there from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. Now, I had very much an impression of students um, packed into rooms, rote learning content, lesson after lesson, bells, morning exercises, doing this with their face, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 and they're all like massaging their faces. At lunchtime, students sleeping. Either in their dorms or even at their desks, and teachers sometimes lying on tables sleeping. If there's no other
Yeah.
space. Um, Morning exercises, singing of the national anthem in the morning, um, afternoon exercises halfway through, um, siestas, as I said, around lunchtime for an hour or so. But then you've got the afternoon shift, and then you've got food, and then you've even got an evening shift. And as I say, the older age groups were there until 10 p.m., even 6 days a week. So that was sort of my cultural experience for a whole year, um, which probably was still quite different to the international setting that you experienced. And this was 2002 to 3 that I experienced this. Then I went to Guangzhou, which is a big city, and had more of a diverse experience in schools, teaching in both primary and secondary schools, increasing my salary. Before I then came in 2004 to Country Garden School and set up the biology syllabus for IB diploma program, so that there was another subject at high level and standard level that students could engage in as part of their IB curriculum. So there was quite a range of perspectives that I then went through as I got more used to the China experience. And for you, it was much more of an international setting throughout your experience, wasn't it? So um,
Yes.
do you think there are some differences in the way that we saw China from that narrative?
Certainly, I remember the international students, and when I say international students, and this was the same in the different schools, the three different schools that I taught at in South and East Asia, Southeast Asia, I suppose I should say. Um, the international students tended to be locals, but they fell under the category of international students because they had foreign passports. So they were typically locals who were sort of at the upper middle class end of society. So they were already well educated, often privately, because they had money. And therefore, they had been exposed to the domestic education system, but there was always some element of international flavor or sort of philosophy attached to that. So I think they were more open than they would have than the students who you initially encountered in China. And although my daughters both started their education in Guangzhou, Guangdong province, and also in Shanghai, and therefore they were exposed to similar to the more traditional, less international version of Chinese education. And that was very much, as you said, longer days and very much fixed times, and the siesta at lunch, which was always a surprise. And like the singing, the raising of the flag every morning.
Yes,
Helen
yes.
was at the age of 7 was the only blonde-haired girl, blonde-haired student there. So they made her stand at the front as they raised the flag, and they'd all sing the national anthem. And she was certainly put in a position of priority in that. And it was very much in contrast to the rest of her education, sort of standing in a field, raising the flag every morning. Um, and
Quite early in the morning as well, right?
it
This all
it
starts
was, yes,
early.
yeah. I think that this was it. It was. Again, it wasn't in sort of central China. It was on sort of more co in Shanghai. It's more coastal, more cosmopolitan, and therefore it wasn't quite as that your sort of 6:30 to 10 p.m. It's not quite as extensive as that, but it was certainly before, your average school hours in UK would be starting. Imagine a student might be there at half eight or so, but in China they would certainly have been there. Helen would have been there like 7:30 or something like that for the flag raising and so on. And also, I did find that these students, in terms of my experience as a teacher, that the students who I taught, being from the sort of upper echelons of society or the richer parts groups, they tended to see themselves as separate, and somehow they saw that they had managed to uh, access a more international sort of social and educational setting. And I remember we'd look out of the window at everybody raising the flag because in the international sections, either in Guangdong or in Shanghai, we were not required to do that. And I think the students were fairly happy that they didn't have to do all the morning exercises, the Tai Chi and the flag raising, and all the other sort of mass exercises, group exercises. And they did enjoy the fact that they were able to uh, choose themselves what they were doing with their time to a greater extent. So I didn't experience so much of that strictly organized day that you mentioned myself, although I was aware of it with my daughters in kindergarten and junior school. And we were a little bit freer. We were sort of very, very much halfway house, I think, between the international and the Chinese. So it's international with Chinese characteristics. And
Absolutely.
similar
Yeah.
similar in Vietnam, although probably more freedom. We were set up in Vietnam to be it's a British curriculum school and British teachers and very much following that. Although the approach of the students was again much influenced by their background in sort of respect of teachers and listening to what the teacher says and writing down everything and taking that as truth rather than challenging it. So fair, not quite your experience, but certainly exposed to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have any experience in Vietnam. I've never been to Vietnam. I had limited experience in Shanghai learning how to teach English for a few weeks in the Pudong area.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, my obviously I have a Chinese wife who is now in the UK, similar to you, but you spent a lot longer in China than me with children, and my children were born and raised in Britain. And my children can't speak much Chinese, whereas both of your girls can, obviously, and they've been immersed in Chinese culture for half of their childhood, so they have that perspective. So it'd be interesting to have their points of view about some of these points of conversation. Maybe in the future, one of them would be interested in joining in with us on this theme. So, do you think that now, if we were to bring this to the modern day, so we've been basically reminiscing about what was true for me 20 plus years ago. Do
Yeah.
you think what we're saying still applies in the modern world? And obviously, Changer has become a technological powerhouse in comparison to 20 years ago. I'm going there next month, so I will again see this firsthand as I go and see my extended family and do some traveling around China. But can you bring the perspective that we might have had 20 years ago more into the modern age and have a more up-to-date perspective on this?
Yes, from what I've seen, then the students that we have coming from East Asia, specifically China, Hong Kong, Taiwan as well, I suppose, that are coming to UK from there, they still have the attitude or approach to learning that to a large extent that they will have it explained to them what they need to know. And the key to their education process is to be able to uh, give that information back under test conditions. But it has changed over the sort of 30 odd years that I've been aware of it, um, towards a more international approach. So um, they that there is a greater willingness from certainly from the students I see coming here, that there's a greater willingness to speak up and to ask for clarification. Maybe it's not quite as direct as actually challenging, but certainly if there's a point that they are unclear on, then they're more willing now to ask for clarification and ask for examples and try to apply it. But there's less direct challenge. Apart from, I have had one or two who were uh, who had broken through this sort of acceptance to a level where they were challenging a lot of it, and sometimes even confrontational. And in a way, I respected that hugely because it was of great value and gave a lot to the classes. But I'm not sure that they were comfortable with it, and they felt a little bit, they had to get a bit sort of, uh, I don't know, annoyed or it's almost a reaction to they're saying, oh, I don't like this. I don't agree with it. I feel strongly enough about it that I want to challenge it. And so they I think that there is a movement forward towards a more open approach to education, but there's still not that is not deeply ingrained into their educational process to the extent that they can do it as a conversational or discussion based
Hmm.
process. It's more like I don't agree. I don't like that.
Hmm.
And it was almost a
Hmm.
confrontational thing. But those students who have done that have gone on. They've obviously trying to find their middle ground. And they've gone on to success educationally, as far as I'm aware. And certainly they were the ones who tended to get the ones who challenged it. They did extremely well, bringing
Hmm.
on both the basically taking bits of both. So they're taking on the sort of Western idea of discussion and challenge, even if they, again, Chinese characteristics, that they are doing it a bit too directly for for Western tastes, I suppose.
Sure.
But they benefited from it. So certainly that synthesis is something that is occurring gradually, I think, and there is great benefit to be had from that. On a sort of side note, I am a little bit concern. I don't suppose it's my concern really, but I'm a little bit aware of the fact that we've had globalization and everything's getting more interconnected, including education, over over our lifetimes. Um,
Yeah.
but there may be something of a kickback against that in terms of the certainly in China again, in terms of the schools reacting against this freedom of thought and the Western education model, that you don't want people thinking too much. You need to train people in a way of thinking that is, shall we say, constructive to society, supporting the social structure and system that holds. And in a way, I think that more recently, China, having moved towards the path of more international, more openness to international education, and taking on boards international curricula and exam boards and so on. That maybe now there's an element of returning to a more traditional Chinese model. And so students are now being pushed to do their Gaokao, the Chinese university entrance, and that has become a priority. Whereas previously, I think it was moving more international. There is a reassertion, and so now they're existing in parallel. But I don't think it's come to. I think it's still a system that is developing. So it's kind of a pendulum going from traditional Chinese sort of Confucian respect, follow what the teacher says, to more discussion based. Now it's moving back a touch towards the you've got to learn this and you've got to follow what the instructions from the authorities. To a lesser extent than it would have been 50 years ago. And I expect that pendulum to keep moving until they settle on something which is a synthesis and a best of both worlds. That's
So,
my
so you mentioned the
optimistic.
Gaokao there. Maybe
Yeah.
we should touch on some differences in terms of the educational system and what it leads to at the end of the school journey. So we obviously have slightly different structures with primary schools, middle schools, secondary schools. They call them different things. There are different names for the schools. The years um, don't completely overlap. Maybe there's more parallels with the educational grade system with Chinese schools. Um, and also, so how do Chinese students get into university versus in the West? How do we approach the entry into university? Are there differences in the um, the testing system for what gets you into the university system?
Yes, I think there are differences, although I'm not totally up with what is required in China. And I'm sure there are plenty of people with, well, I know there are many people with far more expertise in that area. But from my understanding, the Gaokao is a fairly rigorously focused on core skills. I think such as Chinese language and maths. And there's maybe one other subject. I'm not sure about the role of English in there, but I think it is more strictly controlled and standardized, is my gut feeling about it. Um, and there is less room for, again, your individual choice that would hold in the West. So I think that um, it's again it ties up with the Chinese or the East Asian tradition because Confucianism, of course, was not bound to China. It's also deeply influential in Japan, in Korea, in Vietnam, in the whole of Southeast Asia, really, or East Asia. Um,
Right.
and but that still is taking on board the authority, the accepted view, and being able to duplicate that in exam setting. And then, if you can do that effectively, you will be taken on to the top universities. You'll be
Within
accepted by the
China.
top universities
But we're not
in
talking
Asia.
50% of the population going to university, which is kind of during the Blair years, what we were heading towards was like most people with any with A levels would be going to university to do something, whether it be vocational or academically oriented. In China, it's nowhere near 50% of the population that goes to university, is it?
No, it's much more elitist there, and it always was. This exam system was it was the pinnacle of success if you could pass your exams and go to sort of Beijing Daxue, Beijing University, or some of the where else? It was Fudan or Tsinghua or any of these top names. Though it in a similar way to getting a place at Oxbridge, at one of the Oxbridge colleges, would be uh, like a great
The
success
pinnacle.
in the UK. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that always has been a goal. But I I think China may want to extend its education, but to broader, to make it more accessible to more people. But it was very elitist, and I think they've had a stronger line in. And have maintained a stronger line in sort of more practical, sort of apprenticeship type, in a similar way to the German model. I think that they that in the West, a more academic, the ability to think basically is very much praised in the West, whereas in China, that would be at a very elite top level, which would be demonstrated by the ability to repeat the orthodoxy or the view from authorities, but also people who have gone through a more sort of hands-on learning or vocational route in Asia are also appreciated more than in UK. And maybe that's an area that UK can benefit from, that rather
Mhm.
than everybody wanting to go to university, as for per the Blair years, or the Blair years aim that you're talking about, I see with students in UK at the moment a move towards apprenticeship. I was asking one of my classes yesterday about how many wanted to do an apprenticeship, and I think of the 12 that were in the class, again, small class compared to Asia, very much, and I think three of the 12, including one who I would consider to be probably the most academically able student in the class, were saying that they wanted to go with the apprenticeship type route
Yes.
and try to get degree qualification en route as part of that apprenticeship if they could. But the main focus was get on, learn a skill. I think Asia's always
Yes.
had that to a greater extent, as have the Germans. And maybe this is something somewhere where the UK system, maybe we, again, it's the pendulum. We move towards the everybody needs this academic, sort of maybe more theoretical sort of ability to think. And now we might be moving back towards, yeah, just get on, learn how to do something.
It's food for thought, isn't it? The direction of societal change now with AI improving to the extent that it has done. I suppose we should talk a little bit about the context of specifically China, because that's where most of our experience lies. I had the idea that China was less advanced than the West, which was something I did experience firsthand in many ways in 2002 in terms of the development and the infrastructure that was available. Um, but when I went into Guangzhou and saw the subway and saw the skyscrapers and the many I guess chaotic there were still chaotic systems in place, and there was evidence of not everything being quite aligned, and buildings in various stages of being built and not finished, and so on and so forth. If we fast forward to now, would you say that China is still behind the West?
It's an excellent question. And there are many different views on it, depending on uh, partly where you are in China. Geographically, my understanding is that the east coast of China, which of course one from Beijing's point of view, one would include Taiwan, certainly Hong Kong, Macau. These are all Shanghai, Tianjin, Xiamen. If you go down the east coast, down the coast of China, then these are international like areas, internationalized, cosmopolitan, and they are very developed. The skyline of these places is as advanced as anywhere in the world, pretty much, if not more so. So they've certainly changed hugely. I remember the first time I went to Shenzhen in possibly a mid 1980s. It was basically a field, from what I remember. Now it's a city of 10 million people. It's just phenomenal change. And with that, there is the cultural the change in thought processes and the way that people are now far more open to sort of freedom of thought. But again, it's all with Chinese or Asian characteristics that there is still it's still driven by a respect for authority and for family structures and so on, which I think is a very happy medium that it's uh, we're moving towards something where people will learn from what has gone before and are very willing to learn from that, but also are aware of the fact that it's not all uh, like gospel truth to be taken on and digested and accepted as such, that one can one can rather than challenge it, one can take it and adapt that model. And I think that's where the sort of fusion of East and West has value. That if one in the West one learns to discuss these things rather than sort of either you're part of it or you're not, in which case you're inside. If you move outside the system, you are uh, uh, you're fighting it to some extent, or you're countering it, and therefore that might be seen as, you've got to agree, otherwise you're out of line. I think taking on board that Western idea that you can discuss and challenge these ideas without undermining the system, and that one can create a synthesis, as I mentioned before, like from the two separate hypothesis, antithesis, and put them together to try to find a common ground which takes the best of both. I think that China is moving in that direction. And I think that is valuable. That they are progressing uh, rapidly in terms of the outcomes that they're getting from this. And I think with the West still has a role. The West is Western educational model is still of huge value. But I'm also wondering if the Western model might take on board a bit more of this sort of rote learning and uh, this system that enables classes with 50 plus students to get a valuable education, and that um, if that may be where it goes next. Again, it's part of these sort of gradual movements in sort of culture and education, which I think China is showing out of this respect for the West that it's had previously, and now and still has. And But they're very much taking on board these models and uh, uh, let's say adapting it to the Chinese situation. And so I think over time we are moving towards a standardization, but there is resistance to it in parts, and people wanting in various parts of the world, people wanting to get their philosophy followed, understood, and unchallenged. But I think the general movement on both sides is towards a synthesis of these.
So in Britain we have GCSEs and we have A levels. In China there's more of a system leading to a Gaokao, which gets you into university, and it's the small percentage of all students that would go to university. Um, but in terms of cross-border movement of students to seek out different educations, do you think that the Western education system is still sought after by the East? And what about vice versa? Do you think there will be more flow of Western students to Eastern universities?
Certainly, in terms of East. Eastern students coming to the West. I do think that the it is of great value to have exposure to both systems and to be comfortable with both and to be able to take on attributes of both systems and to create something that works for you or that works for the individual. And one can choose um, a more orchestrated and standardized approach, or one can go with a more freer thinking approach individually. There is choice. I think that it does offer choice. I think that for Asian students to come to the West, it is of value to see alternative models being followed and to see how one gets on. And some of the students, we've had some extremely strong students going on to Oxbridge from who have come here from having started their education, primary and sort of early secondary in Asia, and then coming to UK either for GCSEs or just for A level and then going on to university. Certainly, some have, those who are willing to work with the system have thrived under it. And so there is still value there, even though the Asian model is moving towards a more international approach, and even though the a lot of the Western institutions are also showing great interest in setting up shop or setting up their branches in Asia. So there's plenty of international schools based on, for example, the traditional British public schools like Harrow, Dulwich. I think Shrewsbury have got some. Who knows? Who knows where else?
Wellington School.
Wellington, yeah, there's plenty of them now in Asia, and uh, I think they are changing the education system in Asia because the Asian schools have changed to offer some of the strengths of those Western schools that have moved there. So that again is your synthesis that is occurring through this for commercial reasons, and I also think that it would be of value for Western students to have some experience of Asian education in terms of the value of rote learning and on memorization, because I I believe that this is a solid foundation for being able to think for yourself, because to have an understanding of the facts or of a situation makes your free thinking and discussion of the issues involved far more valuable and accurate. So I do see it as being that there is value for Eastern students coming to the West and for Western students coming to the East, and I see it a homogenization as being the direction of travel, although of course there's always resistance to it, and we don't want too much of that influence, and that's what people say. That's not my personal view. That is a view that people resist change, and if it's change from abroad, then they may resist it even more. We've always done sort of things in a certain way, but there is huge value for people to learn about educational processes in other parts of the world, and this East-West crossover is an example of how we can all benefit from it.
Absolutely. Would you like to perhaps close with a few words of Chinese to show off your Eastern language skills? And we will be a bit unconventional with our ending today.
好，我们就可以说中文，跟人家说再见，是吗？是不是这个意思啊？你是不是这个意思？
是这个意思。我们说再见吧。 Uh,
我
what should we talk about next time, William?
你要我用中文说还是英文？我不知道，
呃，可能说中文吧，就可
我们
以吧。
我想下一步就是，我们要考虑还是讲一讲，我们怎么样把自己的能力，我们自己的那个教育的效果可以提高一点。如果用什么做法，比如说，这是从大部分都是西边的想法，就是我们小的动作，我们可以做的，就是让我们学的更好、更快、更成功的，这是我的看法。我们下一次就说这个，你说。
So just to translate the basic outline there of what William's saying, I think it's something to do with personal development and how you can improve yourself using various techniques and skills that you may learn to put into place for self-development purposes. So we'll leave it there for now and see you soon.
拜拜，再见。
再见。